Welcome back to the most unprofessional sports channel on YouTube. Welcome back to Swivel Chair Sports. I'm your host, Zach Circlebar Burkle, here with my host today, Aaron. Go ahead and say hi, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron.
Please make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content. Other than that, let's go ahead and get into it. So, we will be talking about the NFC wildcard race right now. Things have gotten pretty nutty since Monday Night Football, where the Chicago Bears, not the Cleveland Bears, the Chicago Bears took down the Minnesota Vikings, kind of knocking them down a peg in the wild card race and making the 7 seed and seemingly attainable for teams like the Green Bay Packers and the Los Angeles Rams and the New Orleans Saints, who probably have a better shot to win their division, but we'll talk about them a little bit. But yeah. Aaron, like this NFC wildcard race may not be quite as crazy as the AFC because you got the Cowboys sitting way up there, who their spots in no danger of being lost unless they go on a crazy losing streak here. But that 6 and 7 seed kind of up for grabs with Seattle and Minnesota seemingly taking some nasty skids here as of late, huh?
Yeah, kind of tough for the Vikings. They had that nice little magical run. Obviously, with Dobbs getting there and then dropping two tough losses to the Broncos and Bears.
Yeah.
And they've got kind of a tough schedule coming up. Should have I think that could be a decent game against the Raiders. They've been playing pretty good as of late. Then they have the Bengals and Lions, Packers, Lions, which could be three gauntlets of a game, especially with the Packers, kind of finding their footing late and hitting their stride, so to speak.
Yeah, that's the next team I want to talk about. But let's talk about the Vikings. Let's finish up talking about the Vikings here real quick. As you mentioned, Raiders, Bengals, Lions, Packers, Lions. You talk about that Packers game being really tough, but those two Lions game that kind of sandwich it, those are obviously going to be really tough games to win either of those, let alone both. And Minnesota needs all the wins they can get here down the stretch of the season to avoid missing the playoffs. Whether or not at this point they really, they probably would like to make the playoffs, sure. But how much noise they're really going to make when they get there, if they get there, without Kirk Cousins, I don't really know. I don't think they're really going to be able to go very far if they do make it. It'd be a nice story, but I don't see them being very competitive necessarily. So I do expect them, me personally, I expect the Vikings to kind of fall out, especially when you look at kind of some of these teams hot on their tail in Green Bay and Los Angeles specifically. I think both those teams are starting to heat up at just the right time. They could maybe sneak in there as a 7 or even 6 seed, jumping Seattle, and maybe make some noise in the first round and maybe scare a team and move on to the second. But a second team I wanted to talk about, Green Bay Packers. Obviously, they sit here at the 8th seed, just outside of the playoff picture. But they are only one game behind Minnesota, with one game left to play against that team as well. Rest of their schedule looks like this. They got the Chiefs this week, followed by the Giants, Buccaneers, Panthers, then that Vikings game I alluded to earlier, and then wrapping up the season with the Bears. I can't lie, I see a lot of W's on this schedule remaining for the Packers. I mean, 4 games they should win, you would think, in the Panthers, Bucks, Bears, and Giants games. 2 tough ones against the Chiefs and Vikings, but I would expect them to have a really good chance of beating the Vikings as well. Obviously, if they finish up the season 5-1, I feel like it'd be hard to imagine them missing the playoffs at that point. Being a 10-7 team seems to be like what it would take to make the playoffs over there in the NFC, with the Vikings kind of starting to struggle now and the Seahawks starting to struggle now. Kind of what are your thoughts, though, on the Green Bay Packers' recent resurgence?
Jordan Love, he's looked pretty good. They're kind of building their chemistry on the offensive side of the ball. You kind of mentioned, I think in a previous video, losing Aaron Jones, that kind of hurts. But A.J. Dillon's, he's a very good number 2 back. they kind of provide different elements, but he's solid in the run game. And I think their defense, has been playing a lot better as of late. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of comes down to the wire. We were kind of talking about the Vikings just to kind of go back real quick. That last game against the Lions,
Mm-hmm.
um, that one might not be as part of a game. I can see maybe the Lions not necessarily having anything to play for, not playing for like a one seed and kind of having the division already locked up. So
That's a good
maybe
point.
resting some players there.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, that's a really good point you bring up. The Lions could have it all locked up, and they could just be resting players, because obviously the 1 and 2 seeds kind of seem, or at least the 1 seed, I should say, maybe not the 2 seed, but the 1 seed seems out of reach, and the difference between the 2 and 3 doesn't matter anymore. So you could be right. You could be hitting the nail on the head there. Um, let's kind of look at another team in the NFC that's kind of been on a little bit of a down skid. The Seattle Seahawks losing 3 out of their last 4 games. The only win being against a hapless Washington Commanders team. Losing to teams such as the Ravens, the Rams, which is a really important loss, obviously, and then now the Niners, another in division rival. But the Seahawks, I mean, they've now lost both games against the Rams. Um, I mean, they don't have the tiebreaker against them now, because if they have the same record, the Rams are going to be ahead of them because they won both games. So the remaining schedule for the Seahawks is Cowboys, 49ers, Eagles, and then the Steelers. Tough, could be a tough team, and then luckily they finish up with the Cardinals. But I mean, I could see them going 2-4, winning against the Titans and Cardinals, and then losing to those other 4 teams, and the Cowboys, Niners, Eagles, and Steelers. What are your thoughts on the Seahawks right now? Like, they kind of seem like they've started losing at the worst possible time.
Yeah, just struggling to find the end zone these last 2 games. I don't know if it's necessarily all Geno Smith's fault, although he hasn't, had the kind of standout year like he did last year. I think a lot of it kind of falls on that O line. They allowed 6 sacks last game, and it's tough to beat an opponent, especially like the 49ers, giving up 6 sacks. So I think they're probably going to look to, shore up that offensive line as this season goes on. But yeah, they've got a dogfight ahead of them as far as
Yeah,
the remaining schedule.
yeah, and that main team that they're kind of battling with right now, as far as playoff seeding goes, the Los Angeles Rams, um, who has, like I mentioned earlier, the tiebreaker over them. Their schedules, they've got, you could argue, 3 guaranteed wins, and with those 3 guaranteed wins, if the Seahawks only win 2, that puts them at the same record, and then the Rams would have the tiebreaker. Um, Rams remaining schedule, they've got the Browns, the Ravens, but then they got the Commanders, Saints, and Giants. I think those are all 3 winnable games, and then the
You think
Niners
you
to wrap
you
up the
said
year.
3 guaranteed wins? You think the Commanders is a guaranteed win?
I think so. I think so. Yeah. For the way the Rams should be playing, if they're trying to make the playoffs at least, they should win that game. Yes, because the Commanders have nothing to play for really. Um,
I just don't know if I have enough faith in their defense to kind of keep up. Obviously, yeah, the Commanders have struggled, but they've got some real offensive weapons, and it's not necessarily been the offense
true.
that's been the problem this year.
I mean, you could say the turnovers has been the problem, a big problem, I should say. Maybe not the problem,
Yeah,
but I mean, obviously Washington's defense is also depleted since the trade deadline, though, losing all of their best defensive players. So I think the Rams should be able to score on them at will. And if that's
I
the
think if
case,
it's
they
a,
should
sh-
come down to
I
it.
think I lean towards the Commanders in a shootout.
Really?
But I think if it's just kind of, your kind of average, you know, game, then I do
Yeah,
think I tend to lean towards the Rams.
yeah. Well, I think the Rams have a really good shot at making the playoffs over the Seahawks. The tiebreaker obviously is a huge factor in my confidence in that. Um, if you look back, there's actually I was about to say there's a couple games that you maybe point at and think maybe they should have won, but maybe they should have beat the Steelers and maybe they should have beat the Packers. But other than that, I mean, you got a loss to the Niners, obviously amazing team. Joe Burrow, who was still on the Bengals when they lost to them. Um, and then the Cowboys is that other loss outside of Steelers and Packers. So they haven't really lost to any teams they shouldn't be losing to. I feel like, if that makes sense. That's kind of why I feel good about the Rams going forward. I think the Rams are a much better team than people might be giving them credit for.
I think that that Packers loss is probably their worst one.
Yeah, 20-3 is not
Um,
great, but that might have been the game with was that the game without Matt Stafford? I think Stafford was out for at least one game. It was, yeah, that was the game where Matt Stafford was out. So that's a pretty good excuse when you're starting Brett Rippon.
yeah.
um,
Um,
and then
and
that
then
Steelers loss. Yeah,
yeah, that
Stafford
one's
played.
tough. But also the Bengals one where Joe Burrow's kind of hampered by that calf strain. Granted, it is still Joe Burrow, but
Yeah,
obviously the way their season's kind of turned out and their defense struggling the way it has been, that's kind of one that you'd probably want to have back.
no, yeah, that's fair. But those other three, I think, I mean, or those other two, I should say.
Yeah, they don't really have any like really bad losses other
Yeah.
than the Packers and obviously
They've had a
Matt Stafford.
really like when you really go back and look at it, the Rams have had a really tough schedule for the most part this year. So it's honestly hats off to them for being as competitive as they have been. I think if they would have had a schedule like other teams that missed the playoffs last year had, I think they would have had a much better record, obviously. But it is what it is. You can't pick your schedule. So, but is there any other teams you wanted to talk about before I wrap this up?
Unless you want to skip over the Saints, who I guess are still kind of in it.
We
They have
could,
the same record as the
yeah,
Packers and Rams, but
yeah. I just feel like they're not on the same. I don't know. They just don't feel as. Granted, their schedule's not bad. They've got Panthers, Giants, Lions, Panthers, Falcons, or Panthers, Giants. Jeez, okay. Lions, Panthers, Giants, Rams, Buccaneers, Falcons. So I mean, the reason I didn't bring them up is I kind of feel like that's going to come down to the division between them and the Falcons. I don't think they're going to be in the wild card conversation. I think the fourth, I think the fourth seed's going to have a worse record than all of the wild card teams.
what are your thoughts on Derek Carr?
It's I would like to say I'm disappointed, but it's hard for me to say that definitively because he has been injured this year. But I expected more. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't expecting more out of him in New Orleans this year, with a much more talented roster, especially on the offensive side of the ball. You got players like Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, uh, Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Rashid Shaheed. I mean, you got some talented guys, and for whatever Taysom Hill, and for whatever reason, you're just not getting it done on a consistent basis. At least in the worst division in football by far. It's been disappointing. I think that's fair to say. It's been a disappointing year for Derek Carr.
I've always thought he was really overrated. I thought he was just kind of an average quarterback.
I thought he was a solid quarterback on a bad team, but this is starting to make me think he's more of the problem than I thought he was. Um, because he went to the Saints, and it feels like a very similar situation. Which it shouldn't, because the talent is way superior. So, yeah, I would say it's fair to say I'm disappointed in his performance this year. But, anything else you had? Well, then that'll do it here at the most unprofessional sports podcast in the world, Swivel Chair Sports. I've been your host, Zach Circleberg Burkle, here with my coach today, Aaron. Go ahead and say bye. Bye, Aaron.
Fire.
All right, that'll do it. Deuces.